Welcome and good evening. It's a delight to have you here with us at a part of our lecture series related to creating communities of hope for the 21st century and looking at things on a global scale. We're blessed to have two wonderful speakers with us, and I will introduce them shortly. But I want to say that this is also an event that flows out of a gathering of the Center for the Study of Consecrated Life. My name is Sister Maria Simperman. I'm a religious of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, Associate Professor of Theological Ethics here, and have the privilege of serving as the director of our Center for the Study of Consecrated Life. For the past 4 days, we've had an amazing event that invited congregations who wanted to just grow in living mission interculturally to bring teams together and open up the questions we've needed to ask. And two of our speakers were able to stay with us, so to offer a public lecture. I begin, though, with one way of acknowledging the many cultures that we have in this country. And it was a gift of my time in Australia. There is no civic or religious event that does not begin with an acknowledgement of the native peoples, the indigenous of Australia, the Aboriginal communities. And so we begin with our context right here. Creator God, we thank you for everyone gathered here in this place at this time. We acknowledge the Miami, Potawatomi, the tribes of the Illinois. We thank them for the care of this land over countless generations, and we commit ourselves to walk beside them as we work for justice and harmony and peace in our world. Thank you, God, for you know each of us by name and have invited us to walk with you. You know that we rely on you and are dependent on your love. Our trust is in you completely. As we gather together here in learning, reflection, and conversation, we ask that we may know that spirit that is you in us to inspire and guide our hearts. Come, fill our lives with your love. Fill our conversations with your grace and truth. Fill this gathering with your presence. May we know this. We ask this in your name. Amen? Amen. This evening's topic is diversity is not enough, interculturality for mission and ministry. And I simply briefly introduce to you our two speakers in the order in which they will present. We have with us Father Tim Norton, an SVD priest. He's the director of courses in the Centro Ad Gentes Conference and Retreat Center. Reverend Tim Norton is a trained physiotherapist who took vows with the Society of Divine Word in Australia in 1985 and was ordained a priest in 1991. After 7 years working in pastoral ministry in Mexico, Father Tim returned to Australia to work in multicultural initial formation programs. He has province leadership experience with 80 brothers and priests from 20 different countries. He is presently, as I said, director of courses at the Centro Ad Gentes Conference and Retreat Center in Neme, Italy. We are delighted he is with us to bring his years of experience in working in the area of interculturality and religious life. So welcome, Father Tim. Our second speaker is Sister Adriana Carla Milmanda. She's an SSPS sister, director for the Center for the Empowerment of Women in Vulnerable Situations in Argentina. Sister Adriana is from Argentina and joined the Holy Spirit Missionary Sisters, attracted by their intercultural and international life and mission. With a passion for ministry and a personal option for the inclusion of marginalized people, Sister Adriana earned a bachelor degree in theology. After a 6-year mission experience in the Fiji Islands, she completed her MA in theology here at Catholic Theological Union. We're very proud. It was her experience of living with people on the margins and of sharing their journey that stretched her journey with people of more than 30 different nationalities. And it moved her to dive into the stirring richness and dramatic challenges of intercultural life and mission. As I said, Sister Adriana is currently directing the Center for the Empowerment of Women in Vulnerable Situations. At the same time, she has been called to share the fruits of her musings and more on interculturality. This year, Sister Adriana co-chaired a 3-week SVD SSBS international workshop on formation and interculturality that was held in Italy, as well as various 3-day workshops held in Indonesia as part of an international seminar for SSPS formators. So we have the blessing of someone who brings the theology into action with a lot of pastoral analysis, engagement, and living of it. We welcome you, Sister Adriana. Our process is simply this. Tim will speak for about 20 minutes or so, and then we will have silence so you can just sit with what you've heard for almost a minute. Then Adriana will speak for about the same time, and again, we'll have some quiet. We'll invite you to simply talk to each other for a minute or two, and then open it up to conversation with all of you. And we will end promptly at 8:15. Thank you.
So our theme for this evening, diversity is not enough. I do hope you can understand my accent. I will attempt to make it as clear as I can and leave part of my Australian accent behind. Otherwise, Helen, you're the only one that's going to understand me tonight.
And Jared.
And Jared, too. Well, that's big. Okay. As we enter the topic of interculturality, it's probably good to take a step back and wonder together about culture. What is it? And what do we understand by the term culture? One of our SVD anthropologists tells me there's more than 300 definitions, so I'm going to use one. And this is one from Tony Gittins, a lecturer that many of you would know. The way people in groups react to and form and shape their environments. So people in all parts of the world do what they need to do to survive, do what they need to do to live and to thrive. And some in very traditional places, and some in more urban zones. And as our world becomes more urban, then our understanding of culture must include that. So culture, something rarely questioned that becomes a part of us. We teach it to others without really knowing why. So, as an Australian going to Mexico, the family that I grew up in was not a family that was very demonstrative in terms of giving hugs or lots of kisses. I then went to Mexico, and very quickly I learned that I needed to be able to abrazar, to give people hugs, because I was receiving them probably about 25 times per day. So initially, this was quite difficult. In my head, I had to do some adjustments. But after a week or 2 or 3, I found that I started to like it. It was quite nice for me to both give and to receive abrazos, hugs. And within probably a month, 2 months, it became something I didn't think about anymore. So it went from here, my head, to my heart, to my gut. And once it was in my gut, I forgot about it. So I then went back to Australia. And my brother was at the airport. I'm one of three. I have a younger sister and an older brother. And my brother was very glad to see me. We hadn't seen each other for 3 years. And so he put his hand out and I put my hand out and I drew him immediately into an abrazo, into a hug. And he pushed me away and he said, "What the hell are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, sorry. Can we just do that again? Just hi. Really good to see you." But it didn't feel right anymore just doing that. It no longer felt right. I had changed. And so my brother said to me, "So why do they do that in Mexico?" And I said, "I don't know why they do that in Mexico." And I did ask a few people back in Mexico when I returned, and sometimes they could tell me something and sometimes they could not. In fact, at our conference just this weekend, one Mexican man came to me and said, "We do it because then it's heart to heart." And I said, that's really nice. I thought about it, and I've heard that before, but I think that interpretation came well after people began to give abrazos. And I wonder why that began in that form. Don't know, can't tell you. My point being that culture becomes so deep within us that we forget about it. It just becomes a part of us. And we can't always say why it's a part of us. As an aside, my sister-in-law was at the airport also, and I gave her an abrazo. And she said, "You're really good at this. Can you teach him how to do it?" So culture, the framework in which we situate almost everything that we come to know. Culture is that which gives us all a sense of belonging. So I've downloaded this image from the internet. Can you imagine, I don't know, but can you imagine where that photograph would have been taken? Any ideas? Could it be, in an aged care facility perhaps? Yep, maybe, that's my imagination. That's what I'm thinking. I'm guessing that man and that woman did not meet yesterday. They have some level of relationship. I'm guessing that that man is a carer and that woman is a resident at that particular institution. And I'm guessing that woman, like me, perhaps doesn't have a long history of that level of, that form of intimacy in that sort of embrace. And yet to me she looks very happy, as does he. So I'm guessing that over time they've come to know each other. This is me, in my mind. They've come to know each other within the facility, the aged care facility. And they've come to both respect and care for one another. And so to the point where, perhaps it's her birthday, I don't know, but he's able to give her this embrace and she's able to receive it. So there is he reflecting what is normal, I think, for him in his cultural heritage, and there is she able to receive something that perhaps is not normal in her cultural heritage, indicating the learning that we do all our lives around culture. I don't think it stops. So we reflect who we are to others. We reflect our cultural heritage. We don't always know why, and we don't always know we're doing it, but we do it. So the question may come up, is there a perfect culture? What do you think? Most of us would like to think that our own cultural heritage is possibly one of the best. We can't help it. It's called ethnocentrism. But I don't think there's anyone in this room that would say that their culture, their cultural heritage is perfect. It simply isn't. So there is sin present in all of our cultures, even though we are made in the image of God. We need conversion because there's sin and limitation. And the conversion that we're speaking about tonight is this movement from ethnocentrism to interculturality, or to ethno-relativism is another more complex word. And hopefully we can all get to the stage where we can look at our own cultures critically in the positive sense and in the negative sense. I know, it takes a moment, yeah. But with this image, I want to say that something that is much the same, i.e. beef in this case, something that is really the same can mean something that's very different in another place to another people. So this man, Louis Wirth, would speak about the most important thing we know about someone is what she or he takes for granted. So the most elemental and important facts about a society are those that are seldom debated and generally regarded as settled. Meaning that when we do go to another culture, and I'm not always talking about crossing borders, some of you would be perhaps in ministry having worked in either education or health, so different hospitals, different schools have different cultures. I worked in hospitals as a physiotherapist, and certainly each hospital I worked in had quite a different culture, and it takes time. You don't know on the day you arrive what the culture of the new place is. So when you get there, there's lots of things that are simply unavailable to you initially to know, because they're taken for granted by the locals and they don't talk about them anymore. Like, why do we give abrazos in Mexico? We just do. And so this plays out in all sorts of simple and complex ways. One simple way, when I was the formation director in our formation house in Australia, there were I think 16 or 17 students when I began the work after returning from Mexico, and they were from 11 different countries. And so we divided into work groups. We had various tasks to do in the house, of course, to try and keep the house a little bit clean. And one of the groups I remember very clearly was on washing cars. So I would sometimes go around and check how everyone was on their Saturday morning work task, and going down to the fellows who were washing the cars. One of the new guys, he'd only arrived 2 weeks before and was in English class. And he was industriously washing the car, which was great. So he had in his hand one of those sponges that sometimes we use to wash dishes. So on one side it's a sponge, and on the other side it's a scourer, so it really... And of course, by the time I got to him, he was showing off a little bit about how industrious and how hard he could press this particular item into the paint on the car. And of course, he was leaving these great scratch marks down this car, which was a month old, the car. Now, how was he supposed to know? How would he know? In fact, he made me think that as far as cleaning goes, at least in Australia, the number of different agents or items we have for cleaning surfaces is astronomical. Enormous number of, and you're supposed to use each one in a different situation. Now, how is anyone supposed to understand that? So that's one of the simpler examples. More complex would be some work that some of our our members in the Australia province do in Central Australia with Indigenous Australians in a small parish outside of Alice Springs, which is the central town in the country, largely made of the parish of Indigenous Australians. If you call a youth group meeting, you just won't get many youth because of the complex family relationships within that community. They are all from the Eastern Aranda people, but the complexity of their relationships is, for a newcomer, enormous and takes years for an outsider to begin to understand. They don't talk about it, they know it. But if you're new, you just have to do your best to try and learn it because it is not obvious to you when you first get there. So we've got some terms here: multicultural, cross-cultural, intercultural. So I hope the image is helpful. Multicultural being the presence of different cultures, not necessarily interacting. Cross-cultural meaning unidirectional, some movement between cultures in one direction, and then intercultural being in all directions. And we can look at it under that umbrella, various topics. We can look at it with regard to gender, with regard to generations, with regard to nationalities, with regard to cultures themselves, ethnicities. Harrison Moran put together a number of cultural categories, which I think are quite helpful. So we have that sense of space, dress, appearance, time and time consciousness, values and norms, etc., etc. So if you look at that list, and then look at this image. So a large part of what we know about any culture as we cross it is the part above the water. So the part that we can see, taste, touch, smell, and hear. That's the part we can get some good access to. But the part below, which is about 90%, is the part that we don't know much about. It takes quite some time to get there. So the external culture, that's the part above the water. Food, dress, accent, gestures. Sure, we can see, hear, touch, taste, and smell those. And because of that, we can then discuss them, even though it's uncomfortable, but we can talk about those things. And they can change us. And we can be a better group of people living together, working together, by understanding one another and accepting one another's customs in this form. It can change us, often for the better. But the part below, attitudes, beliefs, values, myths, that can just be hidden. Can we ever really know another culture? And that part below can be a great reason for things not to change in any group of people. So when the newcomer comes and makes some suggestions, don't even think about it. It's always been done this way, and we are not changing for you. So we just go back to those cultural categories. As far as being above and below the water, where do you think sense of self and space is? Is it above or below? Okay. Dress and appearance? Above. Time and time consciousness? Both. Values and norms? Below. Relationships? Definitely. Beliefs and attitudes? There's a lot of below going on here. Mental processes and learning? I give that probably both, I think. Communication and language? Above. Food and feeding habits, work habits, practices, also above, I think. Another helpful way to think about culture and change, going from ethnocentric to ethno-relative or interculturality, are these various categories here. So in denial, my cultural experience is the only one that is real and valid. There is no other. In defense, there are some others, but I have a lot of stereotypes about them and I'm not going near them. Minimization, well, I suppose we're all the same. We're not really, but that's minimization for you. And moving to the more ethno-relative or intercultural aspects, acceptance. I accept but may not agree with other cultures. Adaptation and then integration. So a helpful way to look at these things, because it helps us interpret things from a difference perspective. It also shows us what we're not thinking and seeing. So culture is a living system. Culture changes. It changes because we, the architects of culture, also change. We are forever changing. My brother does not hug. Well, he now hugs me on birthdays and Christmas because I make him. But his son and daughter, when I was taking them to high school, I would drop them off, watch them walk in, and all of them, boys and girls, were all hugging one another, hello. Culture changes. A lot of this change, we know it as globalization. Sometimes it's not so good, and sometimes not all bad. There are some good things about globalization. Some of my brothers from different countries now have access to communication with their families they never had before. And there's positives and negatives in that, but the positives are there. But interculturality must be more than differences between different ethnic groups, different tribes, and different nationalities. We're talking about diversity not being enough. It is also about the differences between the culture of being a man and the culture of being a woman. Very different cultures. And it is often difficult for us, from one gender, to cross that border, really to understand the other. In some places, we do it better than others. But I do some work with our guys there are 30 men in the course presently having their sabbatical, and from, I think, 15 different countries, and most of them are working in countries that are not their first. And I do some work on male sexuality, I do some work on sexual abuse, and I do some work on gender relations. Now, even though sexual abuse is a very difficult topic, it is actually easier now to work with the guys in that than it is in gender relations. Because in sexual abuse, all of the guys, even in places where they cannot speak about it, they know something is wrong. But in gender relations, they don't. So to even bring the concepts and talk about them effectively is difficult. But we can have some fun with gender and gender stereotypes. It's not all hard work, I suppose. That's definitely a male kitten seeing himself in the mirror. Ah, you're looking good, you're looking good. That might not be the same for a female kitten. The female kitten may take a little longer before going out into the world. And there are some fun things also where you can show some of these things. In some cultures, they might not be fun in other cultures. So when you're going to a party, when you're going to a birthday, when you're going to some sort of casual encounter or to the gym, for women and men. So in some places you can have a little bit of fun, and it's the shared fun that we need, I think, especially with men, to promote. The one culture, the male culture, talking or denigrating the female culture when they're not present is something we have to really work on with ourselves as men, particularly. And personality, another one of those differences. We all have masks at some point or another. We are very different. So when an introvert has to live and work with a group of extroverts, not easy, not at all. But that's another level of interculturality. And then generations. Often we misname cultural issues as having a national or ethnic base, when in fact they're generational. And of course, class. So these are just some of those cultural frontiers that I present to you this evening, to say that we're all on a journey. We're on a journey from ethnocentrism to interculturality. And a central feature of our journey is the person of Jesus.
Powerful presentations, yes? I thank you both, Tim and Adriana.